What's up, guys? Welcome to the Chess Giant. This is Solomon Ardell, and today we have our 12th and final episode of Season 1 of this subscriber game analysis series when y'all send in me your own games and they have a chance to get analyzed on the channel. Send me any game of yours, chess.com, Lee Chess, an over-the-board tournament game, even a game with a friend. I promise to take a look at it and maybe even post it on the channel. Today's game comes from my guy Yashad, who is rated at 2,300 and played a pretty flawless game. There's not much for me to correct, as Yashad found multiple brilliant moves in a row. And I mean, honestly, I feel like this would be famous if it were a Grandmaster game back in the day, but I really think that y'all enjoy it, and we see some very impressive and high-level chess, starting off against the move e4 with knight f6. Here, Yashad going with the Alekhine's defense, attacking that pawn, and here white decides not to push with e5, but simply defend that pawn with the move d3, and it seems as if more and more players, including myself, are opting not to push this pawn. Yes, it is possible. I mean, instead of the move d3, white can play e5, followed by c4, and keep kicking our knight around and gain a huge center, but that's exactly what black wants. With the Alekhine's defense, we want to give white that big center and attack it aggressively for the rest of the game. So here white's going, look, I'm just trying to play a regular game of chess. I'm not trying to do anything crazy. Let's keep it cool and let's keep it calm. But here we see black continue with e5, and against the move c3, bishop c5. Very active chess from black so far. And following the move knight f3, we see Yashad continue with d5, breaking through in the center of the board. Whole idea being, look, I mean, if knight takes e5, we simply take that pawn on e4. And if e takes d5, which is what was played in the game, queen takes d5 is the best option. And y'all, here white does have an interesting decision to make. We see white break through with the move d4, and white could have played moves like bishop e2 and castling kingside, but they probably didn't like how cramped it was. And on top of that, black is able to play moves like castling kingside, bishop f5, and really start to gang up on this pawn on d3, maybe even eventually put a rook on d8, and white is going to be very uncomfortable with black having complete control of the center of the board. So here we see white continue with d4, but now as black, we see Yashad continue by taking that pawn. And notice what Yashad just created. He created an isolated pawn in the center of the board. And isolated pawns are very interesting. Some players prefer to play with them, and some prefer to play against them. I personally like to go against the isolated pawn in the center of the board. What are the pros and cons of an isolated pawn, generally speaking? Well, in the center of the board, in the opening, with white having an isolated pawn like this, white gets very rapid development. That is one plus. And on top of that, white gets some space attacking key squares such as e5 and c5, and white is really going to try to put the pressure on the black camp. What is the downside of having an isolated pawn? Well, the downside is that really it's just a big target, right? I mean, there's no pawns along the E or C files that are ever going to be able to protect this pawn on d4, at least at the moment, because we haven't taken a piece on c3 or anything like that. So guys, there's really not going to be much protection for this pawn except white's minor and major pieces. And here's black. I think a lot of players would be tempted to just play a move like bishop b4 check. Many think that a check in chess is a good thing, that somehow by checking your opponent's king, you are close to winning the game. But guys, think about it for a second. I mean, if we check this king on e1, yeah, it's kind of cool to say check and say that we attack the opponent's king, but then we see this move knight c3, and all of a sudden it's like, what is our bishop doing on b4, right? I mean, this bishop is limited to this knight on c3, and if we play a move like castling kingside and bishop e2 from white, we could play something like knight e4, trying to really gang up on this minor piece, and it is pinned, but then white just plays a move like bishop d2, and all of a sudden our best option is to just take back with bishop takes c3, in which case white no longer has an isolated pawn with all the space. You could argue that black's position is a little bit overstretched. White's going to continue with moves like castling kingside, c4, queen b3 ideas are in the air, and I just don't think that this is exactly what black wants. So y'all, in this position, instead of Yashad trying to attack the opponent's king with bishop b4, which really just runs into knight c3, in which case, guys, in chess, I mean, sure, there are times where a pin on the knight is very useful, but guys, in this situation, there's just not much more that black can do after knight c3 is played, except just take the knight. So instead, we see this move bishop b6, a very nice option, putting pressure on that isolated pawn. Guys, if you're going against someone that has an isolated pawn, you have to play aggressively. You can't just sit around and allow your opponents to rapidly develop their pieces while you are sitting at home. We have to put pressure on this pawn, and this is really what we see for the rest of the game. Following knight c3, we see queen d6 from black. Almost a Gabinski-Meltz type defensive system. I mean, just bringing this queen back. And notice it's hard for this queen to be attacked. In general, I don't recommend bringing your queen out, but guys, there's a lot of systems, including starting off with the Scandinavian defense, where you can take on d5 and bring this queen back simply one square, and it's going to be hard for white to attack it. I mean, white can't play bishop f4 because we simply won the piece. Knight e4 also cannot be played because of our knight on f6. And here, if a move like knight b5, we simply play queen e7 with check. And after bishop e2, bishop e6, taking full control of these light squares in the center of the board. And this knight on b5 really isn't doing much, but simply defending this pawn. And if this knight ever does get annoying, we can simply kick it out in one move. Here, if white plays a move like castling kingside, we as black can just continue with knight c6. And if a move like bishop e3, honestly, I mean, I don't see the rush in playing a move like a6. This knight is very awkward. Let's just play castling kingside. And again, guys, a very nice and easy position for black. And it could be wondered what on earth this knight is trying to do right now. So guys, against this move queen d6, there's really no way for white to attack this queen very aggressively. So we see this move bishop e2. This isn't a bad move. It does develop a piece, but I think that a move like bishop c4 is a lot more active, especially with your isolated pawn on d4. White cannot play passive. White has the space advantage here attacking c5 and e5. White needs to put as much pressure on black as they possibly can. Maybe even a move like a4 looking to play a5. But guys, this move bishop e2, it does develop a piece, and it gets white one move closer to castling kingside, but that's about it. From black, we see castling kingside, and yet again, guys, let's make this pawn a big target. Let's play knight c6, ganging up with our bishop, knight, and queen all against that pawn on d4, and the moment that white defends it, continue with bishop g4. This isn't directly attacking the pawn on d4, obviously, right? Because the bishop doesn't move like a rook or a king, but what it is doing is looking to take out this key defender on f3. Here, white continues with h3, and we see Yashad continue by simply capturing that knight off the board. And guys, this is a very good lesson that I think you guys can carry into your games. Here, black could have played the move knight takes d4, which, by the way, isn't a mistake. Against this, though, white would be able to capture the knight, and then after that, take on b7 with tempo, right? Because once our knight leaves, that pawn on b7 is going to be hanging, and all of a sudden our rook is going to be attacked. Guys, this pawn on d4 is not going anywhere, and neither are our pieces attacking it. Why not keep the tension in the chess game and play this move rook a d8? Notice how much more awkward it makes things for white now. We're not immediately trying to grab a pawn right when we can, but we're continuing to slowly add the pressure more and more, and really cause white into a very awkward and cramped game. Here we see this move queen a4 from white, trying to create some kind of counterplay, attacking that knight on c6 with the bishop and the queen, also continuing to defend that pawn on d4, and really looking to play a move like rook a d1. Here from black, we see knight takes d4, and now from white, bishop takes b7. But again, our rook is not on a8, so this move is not with tempo. Our rook is on d8, defending the knight on d4, and here from black we see rook fe8. I mean, just talk about a prime position coming out of the opening. We have two active rooks right in the center of the board on d8 and e8, an active knight on d4 attacking some key light squares. This bishop on b6 and the queen on d6 are both very active, defending that very key minor piece, and this knight on f6 is also very active, ready to jump into plenty of light squares as well. A very nice position for black to work with. And now we see rook a d1 from white, and it's very interesting. We got that isolated pawn, but all of a sudden it seems as if white is putting a ton of pressure on this knight. And honestly, I think most players, including myself, would have just continued with c5. This seems like the natural option, just defending that knight, ready to play a move like bishop takes d4. Okay, we'll just take back with the pawn and we're going to be okay. And c5 isn't a bad move in the sense that we'd still have a slightly better game. But guys, here Yashad found a brilliant sequence, and it starts off with the shocking rook takes e3. What on earth is going on? Well, black gives up the exchange and then simply just gives up a piece. We see this move knight g4, simply offering white a piece, and white takes this knight on g4. But let's try to figure out what on earth is going on here. Why did we just give up a rook, and why are we offering up a minor piece? Notice here, guys, if white takes the knight on d4, we simply have a mate on h2, which is a big reason why knight g4 was played. So y'all, e takes d4 doesn't work because we as black simply have a mate in one, and if white tries to stop this with a move like rook f4, because again, this is not checkers. Okay, we're not going to start jumping over pieces. Okay, this is chess. This is a better game than checkers. I am biased, whatever. Against this move rook f4, we can actually just snatch the rook right off the board. Knight takes e3 is also a good option, but this move queen takes f4 is absolutely killer. Whole idea being, if he takes f4, we now have knight e2 a check, and we're down a queen. But guys, it doesn't matter. This king is in a mating trap. If king h1, we have knight g3 checkmate, and if king f1, we have knight g3 check, forcing that king over one square, throwing that bishop into f2. And guys, this game is simply over. Absolutely beautiful checkmating idea. So guys, we obviously have this threat of queen h2 checkmate. If white takes the knight, we're still going to have that checkmate. And if rook f4, we could take on e3, or we could just continue by snatching that rook off the board, giving up a rook, offering a knight, and then offering up a queen, and simply having a one game. What happens after this move h takes g4? This is the move that was played in the game, and this is actually the best option for white, but it's still completely losing because of knight e2. Yashad continuing to put the pressure on white. Absolutely amazing idea. And again, guys, we gave up a rook, we gave up a knight, and now for the third straight move, we're giving up another piece. Knight e2 check, attacking this king. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this move knight g4 looked to support queen h2 a checkmate, but on top of that, it looked to prow out this pawn to the g4 square. Whole idea being this h file is now open, which is a very key idea, because notice if a move like king h1, we have queen h6, and guys, because of the knight g4 move, we simply have a game over. The best move here for white was simply taking on e2, but in this case, we can play bishop takes e through a check. Again, if this king wants to move over, okay, thank you for the mate in one. And if white blocks it with a move like rook f2, okay, let's capture on d1 a couple times, force that king to h2. Notice how this rook cannot defend because it's currently pinned. And the very next move, we're simply going to win a rook. We're up the exchange and a pawn, and this game is simply winning for black. However, guys, after this move knight e2, white decided not to take Yashad's knight and instead went with the move king f2. Seeing that king h1 was a checkmate, why not play king f2 and try to win a knight and get out of this game alive? Well, guys, now as black, we need to play the next two moves perfectly, or we're simply going to have a lost game. But Yashad played these two moves with queen g3 check, forcing that king to take on e2. And finally, queen takes e3 with checkmate, and we have ourselves a game over. Absolutely beautiful attacking game from Yashad. Thanks for watching today's video. If you'd like to see the entire playlist for Season 1 of the Subscriber Game Analysis series, click that playlist to the right. If you'd like to see all of our chess opening videos, click that playlist to the right. Leave a comment down below. Let me know what other videos you'd like to see covered on this channel. And as always, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching. Peace.